Ambassador at Large for Cyberspace and Digital Policy Nate Fick joined Thursday's State Department briefing. Fick was specifically asked about, quote, the risk of Russia's cyber retaliation. During this week, Ukraine's armed forces liberated dozens of settlements from the territories claimed by Russia during its pseudo-referendums. President Joe Biden also warned on Thursday the world could face, quote, Armageddon if Russian leader Vladimir Putin makes good on threats to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine.
Thank you for being here. Congratulations on your gig.
Thank you.
A couple of questions on Russia. How do you assess the risk of Russian cyber retaliation starting from Ukraine to the latest example of Russian-speaking Kremlin-backed group attacking the U.S. states? Do you have an assessment on that, and what is the response?
Yeah, I think again, a few days into this, I may have to keep some of my comments at the level of principles. But I think that the idea of extending deterrence into the cyber domain is an important one across many facets of American foreign policy, including Russia's war in Ukraine. I think that the degree of unity of purpose across the NATO alliance that we're seeing is encouraging. Cyber deterrence is a part of that. And it is, to some extent, it's working, right? We haven't seen yet a ton of lateral escalation using cyber means outside Ukraine by the Russians. Inside Ukraine is one of the interesting success stories of early days is the kind of the effectiveness of public-private partnerships on the ground with software vendors that have, in some cases, hundreds of millions of systems deployed in Ukraine, and the feedback loop between them and the U.S. government on things like threat intelligence sharing and then pushing patches out to systems. I lived this on the other side of the table in the private sector for a long time, and I'm not accustomed to seeing it work as smoothly and quickly as it is right now. So I feel like we're learning, at least on that front.
Kylie, you had your question hand up?
Yeah, just two questions. Just to follow up on that, you mentioned that deterrence is working in Ukraine when it comes to any.
Deterrence is working outside Ukraine. Deterrence is working in Europe and across the NATO alliance.
Okay, and so do you think that that deterrence is one of the reasons that we haven't seen more offensive cyber operations from Russia in Ukraine, or do you think that that is just a decision on their behalf in terms of how they approach this war?
So again, Kylie, with apologies, kind of at the level of principle, since I'm pretty new, I think that there is a robust deterrence framework that's part of the NATO alliance, and I would attribute that, at least in part, for why there haven't been widespread Russian cyber attacks outside Ukraine. Inside Ukraine, I think that there actually has been some meaningful degree of malicious Russian cyber activity, at least that they've attempted. And I think that one of the reasons that it hasn't had the impact that the Russians hoped it would have is because of this tight feedback cycle that's happening between the software vendors and hardware vendors who have stuff deployed in Ukraine and their partnership with the U.S. government and the Ukrainian government and NATO to convey that to accelerate that feedback cycle.